What's up, everybody? It's your guy, Ike Jones. We are in here inside of Lobtown, the Auburn Express powered by the War Report, talking a little bit about the SEC opener here. Let's get to it.
The Auburn Express. You are now listening to the War Report. Lobtown Podcast. With your boy, Ike Jones.
I got my guy, Quinton Corpuel, and listen, we've done this enough times now that I can pronounce your name properly. Here talking a little bit more about Missouri. This time, not football. We're talking a little basketball, but you mind if I call you Q? I'm just going to call you Q.
That's been the most common nickname for me throughout my life, so I do not mind at all.
There it is. All right, Q. Well, how you doing today, man? Happy New Year, all of that stuff, man.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you as well. I've been back home in Maryland for a few weeks now. Mizzou's winter break is pretty long. It's a little over a month, so I don't go back until the 17th, the day before Mizzou takes on Arkansas at Mizzou Arena, which should be pretty fun. But I got back from Nashville a few days ago, covering the Music City Bowl. That ended up being pretty fun for Mizzou when it looked not very fun for most of the game. But Nashville ended up being a prosperous trip for the Tigers, ended up winning 10 games for the second consecutive season, just the third time they've ever done that. And being able to cover a game in an NFL stadium was pretty cool. And I'm also excited to see, side notes, the new Titan Stadium, which is actually currently under construction and should be part of a really, really nice entertainment district they've got planned down there in Nashville. But that was a fun trip, and looking forward to covering some more basketball throughout the month of January. SEC play is beginning, which should be an unprecedented gauntlet, at least from what we have seen through the non-conference slate this year.
Yeah, this SEC schedule is not for the faint of heart. You have to come out here ready to play big boy ball or you will get embarrassed. And I don't think that there is a single team on here that you can look at and say that they're not good. I mean, the worst team in the conference as far as schedule, and if you look at Ken Palm ratings, blah, 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 is South Carolina. And I still think South Carolina is a pretty good team, right? Like if the tournament was just people ranked inside of the net/Ken Palm and in the field of 68, every single team inside of the SEC would make the tournament right now as it stands. And Missouri, I've been saying this, sneaky good team. I think people are sleeping on Missouri a little bit. 11-2 right now coming into this game. But talk to me a little bit about this year's 2024-25 Missouri Tigers basketball team and how Coach Gates has put up an impressive team out there, got some big wins. You know, they got the win versus Kansas, et cetera, et cetera. But talk to me about this version of the Missouri Tigers.
Yeah, definitely. Entering the season, it was a little weird just because of how bad last season was. Again, 8-24, winless in conference play, 0-18, and then bowing out to Georgia in the first round of the SEC tournament. First time since 1907-08 that Mizzou had gone winless in conference play. Last season was one of the worst in program history, probably record-wise the worst, and overall statistics-wise the worst. And so entering the season, once again, Coach Gates brings in a lot of new players. Not as many as the 2 years before. I think entering his first season from Cleveland State, there were only 3 returners from the 21-22 team. Like, he's used to bringing in a lot of new guys, as are many other programs nowadays with the modern-day transfer portal. So I think people, at least within Mizzou circles, pinned the SEC tournament, the NCAA tournament, as a fairly reasonable goal. They started on the bubble before the season, and even though they're still on the bubble right now, I think it's gone a lot better than people expected. You mentioned the win over Kansas. That's the first win they've gotten over the Jayhawks since 2012, and the first one they've gotten since the series was renewed, I believe, 3 years ago. And their only 2 losses were by single digits to Memphis on the road, a game in which they led by double digits in the second half, and to Illinois by 3, also should probably make the NCAA tournament in a game that was back and forth the whole time in St. Louis. Offensively, eons better than last season. They have a lot of guys that can put up 15, 20 points a night. Mizzou's already had a bunch of leading scorers, whether that's Mark Mitchell, the Duke transfer, the Kansas City, Kansas native. Haven't had a whole lot of answers opponents have inside. He's gotten at the free throw line a lot. Tamar Bates has taken a leap this year as an on-ball scorer. He was sort of that last season, but it was tough because he was one of very few options Mizzou had for on-ball creation. And then elsewhere, Josh Gray has been awesome on the interior, transferred from South Carolina via LSU. He provides something that Mizzou did not have last year in a big bruising center. He's played exceptionally in multiple big games, including against Hunter Dickinson in Kansas, where Dickinson turned the ball over 7 times. Josh Gray was a big part of that. And while the rebounding still hasn't been great for Mizzou, which could be a problem against Auburn, who's pretty good at rebounding, and I'm sure we'll get to that, Josh Gray has helped remedy that a little bit this season. And so those are just 3 of the several guys. I'll throw Caleb Grill in there. He returned from injury last game against Alabama State. He was having an awesome season until he injured his neck against Lindenwood on November 27th, kept him out for the whole month of December. He had been lights out from 3. It was something ridiculous. In the span of like 32 3-point attempts, he made something like 24, which is a pretty nuts clip to shoot from downtown. So Mizzou's got a lot of options on both ends of the floor. But I am a little worried against an Auburn team that not only has a lot of options on both ends of the floor, but is very clearly one of the best teams in the country. And not only that, they've proven it against a pretty difficult non-conference schedule.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Auburn's definitely gone through a gauntlet already in the non-con, and they're about to go through another one here in the SEC. You hit on a lot of the points that we want to talk about, but the first guy I want to talk about specifically from Missouri and from an offensive standpoint for sure is going to be Mark Mitchell, right? Like, he has been the most consistent guy for this team throughout the year. Like you've already talked about, there's multiple guys who have stepped up at different points, but I think he's kind of been the consistent guy. He's taken over a little bit of what Sean East was last year, as far as just the guy that you're saying, okay, if we got to focus on getting one guy out of the offense for them, this is going to be the guy for him. What makes Mitchell such a difficult guard for teams this year?
Yeah, he kind of reminds me of Kobe Brown in that they're not super duper tall, but they are incredibly strong and have pretty good touch around the basket. Mizzou this season is in the top 3 in both free throw makes and free throw attempts. That's been a large emphasis for Dennis Gates starting in the offseason. Like last year,
they were good at that last year. Like I mentioned, Sean East went to the free throw line a ton last year. You know, like it's a team that somehow figures out a way to get to the free throw line.
Yeah, well, it was interesting last year. Mizzou almost beat Tennessee in Columbia. And after the game, Coach Gates was pretty upset at Mizzou's lack of ability to get to the free throw line. And that's the first and only time I have ever heard him cuss in a press conference. Ever. He essentially said, we suck, we're effing terrible at it. And I'm sure you can fill in the blanks there about what the F meant. And so over the offseason, Coach Gates really wanted to make an emphasis on getting to the free throw line a lot. And Mark Mitchell has definitely led that charge. Now, the thing with Mark Mitchell, and this speaks to a team-wide sort of issue, last year, they actually didn't get to the free throw line a whole lot, but they were really efficient when they did. This year is the opposite. Mizzou has gotten to the free throw line a lot. They haven't been super efficient. That has actually gone considerably down since last season. Part of that is Mark Mitchell. Think back to the Illinois game. Mizzou loses by 3. Mark Mitchell goes 6 of 12 from the free throw line. That's great that he's getting to the line 12 plus times.
That's right about his average. He's shooting 50% on the season right now from the free throw line. Yeah,
that number is going to need to go up, especially in conference play. If Mizzou wants to make a pretty good at-large case, because, look, anything's possible. Again, a lot of these teams are more than NCAA tournament caliber. But if Mizzou does not win the NCC tournament and conference play goes how I think some people think it's going to go, considering how they've played so far, they want to pick up some of those like really strong quad 1 wins. They're going to have to make more free throws. Getting to the free throw line hasn't been a problem, and I expect them to keep doing that. But making free throws is going to be the next step, and part of that starts with Mark Mitchell.
Right now, Missouri is a team that's really playing like 10, 11 deep right now, right? They've got 11 guys averaging at least 10 minutes per game. But from a like true depth perspective, right? Like when I look at points per game, you still have 1, 2, 3, 4 guys averaging double digits in points per game. What kind of style of offense is Missouri going to be bringing into Neville Arena when the Auburn fans take a look at this?
Yeah, it'll be kind of similar to what Mizzou was 2 years ago. And if you're thinking to yourself, didn't Auburn destroy Mizzou 2 years ago when they came down to Auburn? Yes, they did. That did happen. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be the same final score as it was 2 years ago, but they're going to bring a similar style of offense. They want to get out in transition. They want to attack the basket as much as possible. I think that's the biggest deviation from 2 years ago. A couple of years ago, they wanted to shoot threes whenever. It wasn't quite, I think, of like Loyola Marymount in the late 80s and the early 90s. They're not that extreme. And I don't think anybody will ever be that extreme ever again. That was an outlier. But Mizzou now, they really want to attack the basket, hence how they've gotten to the free throw line so much. That hasn't been getting fouls on the perimeter. That's generating a lot of rim attempts and getting rewarded if a shot does or doesn't go in with trips to the charity stripe. And so whether it's somebody like Anthony Robinson, I knew I was forgetting somebody when I was mentioning guys that are impactful. Anthony Robinson has taken a huge leap from last season at point guard. And one of the areas where he's really improved is not just his willingness to attack the basket, but his finishing ability around the basket. So I expect Mizzou, especially if they're not hitting 3-pointers, to try and get to the cup as much as possible. And then defensively, they're pretty fluid. They want to switch a lot. They've got sort of an amorphous zone defense that switches in and out pretty often and can be a little confusing even for me. I'd like to consider myself somebody who understands basketball and watches the game a lot, but they move in and out of zones pretty quickly sometimes, and that's caused some confusion on the other end. And so this is a very, very scrappy team, a team that I don't want to give like the whole old school movie moniker of they're underdogs and they want to fight tooth and nail, but they truly are relentless, especially on offense. So I'm curious to see if they carry that over into Auburn, because I have a feeling that this game is going to set the tone for the rest of conference play.
Yeah, no, this is absolutely a tone setter. It's a big weekend in the SEC. We're in here talking with my guy, Quentin Corpuel, and he is breaking down the Missouri Tigers basketball team this season. And, you talked about it a little bit defensively, and I think that's the thing that, for me, has been in watching Missouri play, the biggest difference this year for them has been really on the defensive end in their ability to, I think you said it perfectly, confuse offenses with the way in which they're trying to switch in and out of what they're doing defensively. What do you feel like is the kind of the central focus of how they're able to do? Because when I look at Auburn, let me just talk about Auburn. Janai Broom's the quarterback of that defense, right? Like he's the guy back there, and he's making sure he's calling out the screen. Who's the guy on Missouri that really makes that defense go?
Anthony Robinson II. He sets the tone on the perimeter. One of the strengths entering Mizzou that folks that watched him or knew him figured would translate into college was his pestilence on the defensive end. Like he is really annoying. He's not built. He's not physically like an outlier by any means, but he will stick to a ball handler like Rice. He has active hands. It's all the classic things that you're taught from a very young age to do on the defensive end if you want to have really good fundamentals. And that's exactly what he does. He's part of why Mizzou's steal rate is really high nationally. That's actually something I'm going to be looking out for, because we've got strength on strength. Mizzou's really good at turning opponents over, especially generating steals. Auburn barely turns the ball over at all. I believe they're top 5 in the entire country in fewest turnovers per game right now. And that's part of why I really think they can make a deep run in March Madness when the time comes. And so I feel like if Mizzou is able to turn Auburn over more than, I think they're averaging, like only 8 turnovers a game right now, 8 or 9 turnovers a game. I think they'll put themselves in a better spot than if they don't do that, because a lot of Mizzou's success this season has come in transition. Being able to capitalize off of live ball turnovers, not just necessarily passes out of bounds. I do want to make one note, though. Dennis Gates actually led with the media sort of an analytics session where he broke down what certain analytical stats mean. so media members could further understand why Mizzou makes certain decisions, why Dennis Gates does certain things the way he does. And one of the things he explained was a live ball turnover on offense is worse than if you threw a ball 10 feet into the stands,
Right.
because you're able to go back and set your defense with a dead ball turnover versus if you get pickpocketed or a post entry pass goes awry and somebody picks it off. All right, now you're in scramble mode,
Right.
and the defense can now turn to offense a lot quicker and probably a lot more effectively. So I think if Mizzou is able to generate a lot of those live ball turnovers, which they have done a pretty good job of this season, I think they'll be in fairly good shape.
Yeah, Auburn just south of 9 turnovers per game right now, averaging 8.8 on the season. Has not been a huge issue for Auburn, but it sneaks up on them every now and then at certain points during the game when the offense starts to get stagnant. You'll start to see some of those turnovers start to happen. And fortunately for Auburn, there have not been a lot of live ball turnovers. There have been a lot of just, throwing the ball away type situations, a travel here and there. But yeah, to Coach Gates, of course, really, I think Coach Gates is he is probably one of the most underrated coaches in this league. I think he's a really good coach that is coaching in a really tough league and hasn't had opportunities to really show how good he is. But I like Coach Gates a lot. But he's absolutely correct that when you get into the situation where you're having to play in transition defensively, it makes it easier for teams to go get easy buckets. And, those field goal percentages for Auburn have been so high because of their ability to be able to get out, not necessarily in score and transition as good as they have been in the last couple of years, but to make defenses play in that what they call a secondary break, right? It's a live ball. They're not necessarily getting in transition, but they're getting into early offense a lot more this season. So it's been very good for their efficiency rating, of course. Talk to me a little bit, though, on the other side of this. You've talked about Missouri, but what are the things that you, as a guy who's analyzing this thing, scare you the most about this Auburn team, outside of Player of the Year candidate Janai Broome? You can talk about Janai Broome if you want to, because it's absolutely fair game to talk about one of the best players in the country. But he and whatever other things you can think about there.
Yeah, I think Auburn is effing terrifying. Like, to be completely honest, they have so many guys that would probably be top 2 options on most other teams in college basketball on both ends of the floor, starting with Janai Broome, who's a legitimate Wooden Award candidate right now.
Right.
And I think if you're talking about a case for, again, March Madness, still far down the line, still have conference play to go through, a lot of teams that succeed in March Madness are old. Veteranship oftentimes wins.
Right.
And I believe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but 7 of Auburn's top 8 scorers are seniors.
Yes.
And the lone non-senior in that group is Tahad Pettiford, who was one of the most electric freshmen in the country in a year where I honestly can't remember. Look, I'm young. I'm not even 21 years old yet. I can't remember there being this many awesome freshmen at one time.
It's definitely been the year of the college of the freshmen in college basketball. Just how many dynamic, like, guys that aren't playing like freshmen but are out there that were highly touted, and they hasn't been disappointment from a lot of them.
Yep, and Tahad Pettiford is certainly part of that. They're so enjoyable to watch just because they can do so many things so well, and there's also not one area of the game you can point to and say, oh, a team can easily exploit X or Y or Z. They're not bad at anything, at least right now. They're fun. They're exciting. Showtime Tigers, especially when Ja'Kai Howard decides to leave the ground. That's pretty fun.
Yeah.
Except the one time on the airplane. That wasn't very fun.
Yeah.
But
hey,
on
it's still exciting.
Yes, on the basketball court when he leaves the ground. That's pretty fun. And so, I mean, look, they've already beaten a lot of really good teams. Oftentimes when a power conference team starts conference play with a pretty good record, you can oftentimes chalk it up to a fairly weak non-conference schedule.
Right.
They've already beat Purdue.
Yeah.
They went into Cameron Indoor. They almost beat Duke, but again, I expect Duke to get an invitation to the big dance. But they've also beaten Iowa State and North Carolina.
Yeah.
And Houston.
Memphis.
Memphis, exactly. They've already beaten a lot of really good teams.
Yeah.
And they've dominated some of those teams too. they dominated Purdue, who, again, I think is still a very good team.
Yeah.
And so they have a lot of options on both ends of the floor. They don't really shoot themselves in the foot that much. Their offensive rating, I think, at least according to KenPom, it is somewhere just north of 130 in the KenPom era, which I believe goes back to 2002 or 2003. That is the highest. That would be over a full season, the highest KenPom offensive rating ever. I think the only one that's been at least 129 was 2014-15 Wisconsin, and that team made the national championship game. Right. So this has been a machine. In a conference full of machines, Auburn is right at the top there with Tennessee, the only team that's above them in the current AP poll. So there's a lot to like about Auburn, maybe not for its opponents, but at least from a neutral viewer's perspective, they've been a ton of fun to watch this year. And their model of success, I believe, is sustainable once the big dance comes around in a couple of months.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. Like I said, I talked to somebody about this recently, and I've said it a few different times on different shows that I've been on. It's like, if you can name me a thing that you think that is a weakness for Auburn, I'll tell you, you're reaching to go find it, because it's not a real thing. Like, there are things that if you get a little bit of this, a little bit of that, that'll make it a scary game for Auburn, but it's not like, oh, we're going to attack this, they're weak here. It's not one of those things for this team, except teams that I think that get to the foul line really well, which is why I've said for a while now, this is why this Missouri game for me feels like one of those games where it could be tighter than people expect it to be, because of where Missouri is expected to finish and where Auburn has been so far this season. And teams that rebound really well on the offensive glass, I think, can pose some problems for Auburn. But last question here before I let you get out of here is, Missouri wins the basketball game if? What do you feel like Missouri wins if this happens?
If they get to the free throw line and make their free throws, I will call that a package deal, because that's a sort of two-step process. So, yeah, I'll do that. And then they also win this game if they start hitting from downtown. One of the things that's allowed them to succeed this year is, again, free throws. Behind that is the fact that it has made up for Mizzou's lack of three-point makes, which has been fine in some games. Like against Kansas, Mizzou only made 4 3-pointers. They also dominated the Jayhawks on the interior offensively and got to the line a bunch. Think about Cal. They won a crazy game over Cal, classic ACC school, and the California Golden Bears in the SEC ACC Challenge.
Right.
Mizzou attempted 3 3-pointers in the second half. But one of the big reasons why they were still able to get to 98 points, they shot 21 of 23 from 2-point range in the second half, which obviously isn't sustainable, but they've been able to supplement a lack of 3-pointers with every other method of scoring. I would rather them not have to do that. If they are able to hit threes, which they have in a few games this season, they got really hot against Memphis, for example. That's how they were able to push themselves to a double-digit lead in the second half. I think they'll be in a pretty good spot. Caleb Grill, again, is back. He shot 2 of 7 against Alabama State. He looked fully healthy and has gone on some heaters already this season. So I think if Mizzou's able to make some 3-pointers, they probably win. And then one final key, I think if they're able to win the turnover battle, Dennis Gates always talks about assist-to-turnover ratio as a paramount key to success. I think he's probably mentioned it on average once every press conference as a key to victory. And I totally agree. Now, is it going to be really tough against Auburn, who doesn't really turn the ball over that much? Yes. But in the SEC, I don't think anything's going to be very easy. So, yeah.
All makes sense to me. Well, listen, man, I'm looking forward to this. The SEC season is upon us, and it is going to be one for the ages, I believe. I think the SEC, if it plays out the way that it looks like it's going to, is going to get potentially a historic number of teams into the big dance at the end of the year. And listen, I wouldn't be surprised if Missouri is one of those teams based upon just what I've seen them do already in the non-con and what I expect them to be able to do and sneak up on some teams here in the conference. All right, well, we're going to get out of here, man. Again, I always appreciate you coming in here. Tell the people how they can keep up with all the great things that you have going on right now.
Yeah, of course. So my Twitter X handle is just my full name, no spelling, @QuentinCorpUL. Haven't made the jump over to Blue Sky although that might happen sometime in the near future if certain things play out. But yeah, you can follow me at Quentin Corpuel on Twitter /X. I post on there pretty frequently for beat responsibilities. And you can also find my work at rockmnation.com. So thanks again, Ike, for having me on. This was really great. And hopefully the contest on Saturday is a little better than the last time Mizzou made the trip to Auburn.
Well, I'm looking forward to a good game this weekend, but I'm going to get out of here. You know, you can follow us at The War Report, and we are there on all the stuff except for TikTok, which we are TW Report. Make sure before you get out of here, you like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, share the content with somebody. We'll be back at you with our post-game reaction right after the end of this game. But until the next time, and as always, War Eagle, I'm out of here.